I have told a great many lies in my life, most of them small, most of them in the service of keeping young men calm when calm was the only thing standing between them and the dark. A first sergeant lives by the useful lie. You tell a frightened 19-year-old that the round that took his friend would never have had his name on it, that the cold will break tomorrow, that the supply bird is coming Thursday for certain this time. You tell them what they need to hear to get up off the floor of the bunker and go back out to the wire, and most of the time the lie is a kindness and there is no harm in it. But I am too old now for the comfortable ones, and there is a thing I got wrong that has sat on me for the better part of 20 years, and I would rather set it down here plainly in my own words than carry it any further toward the grave. I was the senior enlisted man at a place we called Outpost Larkin, a scatter of plywood huts and Connex boxes and sandbag walls bolted to the shoulder of a mountain so high and so cold that the snow up there never fully melted, not even in what the maps insisted was summer. We held that ground for one reason and one reason only. From Larkin you could see the only road through the high country, a thin gray ribbon that climbed out of the valley far below, crossed a saddle of broken stone we named the Long Spur, and dropped away north toward country we did not control and did not pretend to. Whoever sat at Larkin watched that road. That was the whole of the mission. We were a thumbtack on somebody's map in a warm building, and for 2 long winters we had been a thumbtack that bled. I want you to understand what those 2 winters were, because you cannot understand what I got wrong unless you understand the men I got it wrong in front of. We were a line infantry company, the better part of it, reinforced with a weapons section and a handful of attachments. We were not special. We were not chosen. We were ordinary American soldiers doing an ordinary hard thing in an extraordinary cold place, and we had been doing it long enough that the place had taken pieces of us. We had buried men off that mountain. I had written the letters. I had stood in the snow while the bird came up to take them down, and I had gone back to the wire after because that is the job. The wire does not care that you have been crying. By the time this story happens we were as hard and as worn and as suspicious of strangers as men get, and we had earned every inch of it, and that is the thing you have to hold in your mind when I tell you how badly we behaved. Because by the time this happened we had been told we were going home. Not home, but the outpost was to be closed. There was a push coming in the spring, a big one, the kind of thing that gets planned in warm rooms by men who have never once had their boots freeze to the floor of a bunker in the small hours, and in the new arithmetic of that push Larkin no longer added up. We were to inventory everything, pack what could be carried out on our backs and on the mules, destroy what could not, and walk down off our mountain through the only pass that led to the valley, a crooked granite gut we called Cutter's Notch. A relief element would come up to meet us partway and cover the last of it. We were, in the cold, clean language of the order, to be consolidated. I had been a soldier long enough to know that consolidated was a tidy word for a thing that is almost never tidy, and I did not like the smell of it, but orders are orders, and I had spent my life keeping that opinion behind my teeth. So we were short-tempered, and we were bone-tired, and we were counting the days, and the days had that brittle quality they take on at the end of a long deployment, when every man has begun to let himself believe in the bird that will carry him out and is therefore more afraid than he has been in months, because now he has something to lose. And into the middle of all of that, on the last resupply bird before the weather closed the high ridge for good, came the woman the men would spend the next week calling the inspector. I remember her stepping down off the ramp into the rotor wash with one hand holding her cap and the other holding a green document folder flat against her chest, and I remember thinking in the small uncharitable way a tired man thinks that she had dressed for a different war than the one we were fighting. Her field jacket was clean, her boots were clean, and the laces were even. She had the unmistakable look of somebody who had spent the last several months in a building with floors and heaters and a mess hall that served food on plates. The bird didn't even bring its engines down. It dumped its slung load and a few mailbags in her, and it was gone again, beating away down the valley before the snow it had thrown into the air had finished settling. And there she stood at the edge of our miserable little world, blinking against the cold and the grit. The only person on that whole mountain who did not look like the mountain had been chewing on her for 2 years. Captain Doyle came out to meet her because that was his job, and I came out a pace behind him because that was mine, and because I wanted a look at whatever division had decided to send up the hill on the last bird before the snow. She introduced herself as Major Calloway. She said she was up from division. She said she had been sent forward to look the outpost over ahead of the closure, to assess and inventory and report, and I watched Captain Doyle's whole face change at that. The way a man's face changes when he understands all at once that the person standing in front of him has come to grade his work and then take it away from him. Doyle was not a bad officer. I want that on the record because of what comes later. He was young for his command and he was proud, the way the good young ones often are, and he had held that miserable mountain through a winter and lost men doing it. and he heard the word inventory, and he heard the word assess, and what he understood was that someone clean from a warm building had come up to put a grade on the worst year of his life. "Major," he said in that careful, level voice that officers use on other officers they have already privately decided not to respect, "we've got this well in hand. We've been packing for a week. Everything's accounted for." "I'm sure it is," she said. Her voice was even and quiet and gave away nothing at all. "I'd still like to see the ground." "There's not a great deal of ground to see," Doyle said. "It's a hole on the side of a mountain, ma'am. Why don't you set yourself up in the command hut, get warm, and we'll bring you whatever paperwork you need. The men have a great deal to do before the weather closes us in." She looked at him for a moment, and then she looked past him at the mountain. I watched her do it. She looked at the long spur, black and broken against the white sky. She looked down into the wide, shallow snow basin below us that we had named the Pan for the way it lay flat and bright and held the cold like a skillet holds heat. She looked at the bald granite finger that rose off the eastern lip of the outpost, a spur of bare rock the men had named the Thumb because that is what it looked like, a thumb sticking up out of a closed fist. She looked at the thin gray thread of the road and at the place far off where it climbed the far ridge and dropped out of sight. She looked at all of it the way you look at a face you were trying to place, slow and careful, and then she said, "All right. I'll need a current map and I'll need to walk the perimeter myself. I won't rotate down." And the snow came on again behind us as we went, soft and steady out of that flat white sky. And it covered the Pan and it covered the crown of the Thumb and it covered all of it. And Outpost Larkin came off the map exactly the way it had always been going to come off the map. But it came off the map with the garrison alive, and that was not the outcome that the ground and the order had written for us in the dark. And the only reason in this world that it went the other way was a quiet woman in a clean field jacket with a green folder and a notebook full of distances that we had laughed at for 4 days. I served 11 more years after that mountain. I made command sergeant major before they finally let me go. I trained a great many soldiers in those years, and I told a great many of them this story or pieces of it, and I always made very sure to tell them the part they do not expect, because it is the part that matters and it is the part they always want to skip. The part is not the shooting. The shooting is the easy thing to admire, and admiring it teaches a young soldier nothing but to want to be the one on the rock. The part I made them sit still and think about is the 4 days before the rock. The 4 days she spent walking a mountain we had all agreed to abandon, ranging ground we had all agreed not to fight on, kneeling in the snow to pace off a distance, climbing a bare rock in the cold to draw a working picture of the basin, writing down the way the wind came off the high snow at 3 in the morning, doing the patient, unglamorous, thankless work that not one soul on that mountain would ever have praised her for, while 100 tired men laughed and called her the weather lady. Because that right there is where the night was won. It was won in daylight in the cold on the days when there was no one to impress and no glory whatsoever in the work, by a soldier who ranged the ground at every place she went, because, as she told me on the rock with the joke dying in my mouth, it cost nothing and it had saved her life more than once. The hours on the crown of the Thumb only ever spent what those 4 laughed at days had already earned. I am an old man now. Most of the men off that mountain are scattered to the 4 winds or gone on ahead of me, and the war we fought up there has taken on the strange unreality that all old wars take on in the end, like a thing that happened to somebody else, somebody younger, somebody I used to know. But I have never once been able to make the inspector unreal. I can still see her stepping down off that bird with one hand holding her cap and the green folder held flat against her chest, looking out of place and out of season in her clean jacket, the only person on the whole mountain the mountain had not yet touched. And I can still feel, and I make myself feel it every time on purpose, the small mean private pleasure I took in stepping into her path and telling her to handle the paperwork. I have spent a long time being ashamed of that man, the man who looked at a soldier across a cold yard and decided in the space of 2 seconds exactly what she was, and was wrong about every single part of it. If there is one thing in the whole long account that I would have the young ones take away and keep, it is not how far she could shoot. It is only this: be very, very careful all the days of your life what you decide a person is from across a room. The world is full to the brim of quiet people in clean jackets carrying folders you have laughed at, and every so often, more often than your pride will ever want to admit, one of them turns out to be the steadiest hand and the truest heart on the whole mountain, and the only way you will ever learn which is to be the kind of fool I was and pay for it, or to do the wiser and the better thing and simply not laugh, to wait, to watch. To let a person show you, in their own time and their own way, what they truly are. We had a name for what she was in the end. The colonel said it in the notch. The men on the far ridge had a name for her too, and they said it into their radios in the dark, in fear. But the truest thing I ever learned about Major Calloway I did not learn from a call sign or a record or an enemy's fear of her. I learned it in the gray light at the mouth of that pass, when a woman who had just held a mountain alone through the worst night of all our lives turned and gave a beaten captain back his pride, and gave a guilty old sergeant back his peace, and asked for nothing in return for any of it. She was the finest soldier I ever stood beside. And the worst mistake that frozen mountain garrison ever made, the mistake I led them into, and the one I have spent my whole life since trying to make right by the telling of it, was deciding, before she had said 10 words to a one of us, that she was anything at all less than that.